Well, it's been a busy week in the impeachment inquiry. Congress passed a resolution formalizing the investigation into President Trump. The historic week started Monday when House Speaker Nancy Pelosi formally announced plans to hold a vote. Tuesday, the House Rules Committee released the text of the resolution. Lawmakers marked up the bill on Wednesday, and yesterday, the resolution passed 232 to 196. Lawmakers also pressed forward with closed-door testimony. On Tuesday, they heard from the first official who was on the Ukraine call, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. We learned that he believed the White House left out crucial details from the partial transcript of the president's July call with Ukraine's leader. The next day, career Foreign Service officers Christopher Anderson and Catherine Croft testify. We learned from Anderson that former National Security Advisor John Bolton warned of Rudy Giuliani's influence on Ukraine. And Croft said that she was in a meeting with President Trump prior to July 25th, where an official reported Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney had placed an informal hold on security assistance to Ukraine. Well, Thursday, the president's former top Russia advisor Tim Morrison testified. He was on the president's phone call. Morrison corroborated what U.S. diplomat Bill Taylor testified last week about the president's holding up military aid to Ukraine. But he also said that he did not think anything illegal was discussed. Meanwhile, the president has maintained that his resistance to the impeachment inquiry continues to hold firm onto that. He's been tweeting throughout the week, and the White House has called the entire process a, quote, blatantly partisan attempt to destroy the president. Well, to wrap up this critical week, I want to bring in CBS News Chief Congressional Correspondent Nancy Cortez, as well as CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett. Whew, first off, that was quite an intro to get through. Now that I got through that, I want to bring in our experts.
Well done, Rena. Well done.
It was quite a week to get through.
It certainly was. It certainly was. Major, I want to start with you. We began with Congress approving the impeachment investigation. Really put this into context for us. How historic of an event was this?
Every time any House of Representatives even debates the question of impeachment, it is historic. And when a House of Representatives has a vote to authorize an inquiry, it is an extra layer of history. This is an unusual and seldom used constitutional measure. Some would call it a remedy. The Constitution outlines a process by which a sitting president can be removed, essentially meaning the House of Representatives is interposing itself between the voters who last decided who to elect president of the United States. The definition of what is suitable to take an action of that history-making consequence and constitutional implication is treason, bribery, or, more traditionally, high crimes and misdemeanors. And the next phase of this, Rena, is going to be what evidence House Democrats have gathered so far. It will lay before the public, and does the public, by a majority opinion or maybe just a plurality opinion, say yes, that looks like high crimes and misdemeanors to us. That's where this is heading. And
Nancy, I want to ask you about sort of that next phase, where this is heading. What does happen next as this moves into the public phase? What do you see and what are you looking for?
Well, we've got at least one more week's worth of depositions. In fact, on Monday alone, there are 4 depositions scheduled. That's partly because Democrats realize that a couple of people on their list may not show up. Most notably, they have called on John Eisenberg. He is the top lawyer at the National Security Council to come in and testify behind closed doors. He is the individual who, once he got all these various concerns from folks who work at the White House about the president's call with the president of Ukraine, the president urging the leader of Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden, he decided to move the summary of that call onto a highly classified server at the White House, essentially so that word of it wouldn't get out, which clearly didn't work. But anyway, he is someone that lawmakers really want to hear from. Whether or not he'll show up, we still don't know. And then probably the most anticipated deposition of the week comes later in the week. John Bolton, the former national security advisor, who has said that he's not going to come and testify voluntarily, but his lawyer has indicated that he would respond to a congressional subpoena. Will there be more depositions after that? We don't know yet. None have been scheduled. So we're watching to see whether the Congress does then move into this public phase of hearings and who they decide to have come and testify in public first. The first televised hearings on impeachment in 21 years? Or do they continue with some of these closed-door interviews where they've really been able to gather a great deal of information before they move into that public phase, say, later in the month?
Major, you heard Nancy lay out this whole public phase of all of this, but I look at that vote yesterday in the House. Not one Republican turned. 2 Democrats chose not to vote in favor. What does this say as we're moving forward, and is the White House confident that they're going to win on this?
Well, win is a multi-layered question. Does the White House believe it can avoid an impeachment process rendering articles of impeachment that the House Democratic majority will approve? No, it does not. That's one phase of impeachment the White House is bracing and has been for weeks bracing to ultimately lose. Then it knows that that set of questions, that indictment from the House, would go to the United States Senate, where a trial would be conducted, and the question laid before the Senate would be, do you find the president guilty and therefore remove him from office? The White House believes, and has believed quite confidently, it will survive that process. Now, the question is, what happened with that vote yesterday? If you'd had that vote, and I will ask Nancy Cordes to back me up on this, 3 weeks ago, I don't think you would have seen as many House Democrats vote for it as you did yesterday. And you wouldn't have been certain that no House Republicans would have strayed. So a couple of things have happened. Democrats have become more unified around this proposition, meaning you're going to have an inquiry, and that inquiry, everyone knows, is going to lead to articles of impeachment that will be brought back to the floor and voted on by the majority party. The House Republicans also knew that any House Republican who strayed on this vote could also stray on the question of an article of impeachment. And what the White House wanted to do? Lock down every single one of those House Republicans, because the White House bets, and I think it's a very good bet, if you didn't vote for the inquiry, you're not going to vote for an article of impeachment. You're not going to cross that Rubicon, cross the president, and put yourself in all sorts of political jeopardy by saying no on the inquiry and suddenly yes on an article of impeachment. So it is also historic in this sense, Rena. We've never seen as partisan a division on a question of an impeachment inquiry before. In Richard Nixon's case, that was overwhelmingly bipartisan to start the process of an inquiry. Even for Bill Clinton, 31 House Democrats sided with the majority party House Republicans to begin that process. As Republicans gleefully and to some degree disingenuously said yesterday, hey, the only bipartisanship here we see is against. 2 House Democrats against, not what you would call substantial bipartisanship.
So, Nancy, with that in mind, what's the strategy for Democrats on the Hill? I mean, the understanding is when this moves to the Senate, which is where you remove the president, the votes don't exist. So what do they want from all of this?
Well, I think Major is 100% right about the Republican strategy here. There's a new Washington Post poll out that shows that while the public at large is relatively split on the notion of impeachment, with just a slight majority favoring it, when you look at Republican voters, something like 18% of them support impeachment. So if you're a Republican lawmaker and you're looking at that, you're thinking, I know where my bread is buttered, and as long as the party is going to continue to stand by the president, and when I say the party, I mean the party's voters, there isn't much incentive for a Republican lawmaker to stray. Beyond that, I think a lot of Republicans viewed this vote as sort of a protest vote, or a way to exert leverage, if you will, to say that they believe that this process is unfair. They're going to vote against the impeachment inquiry resolution because they think that by doing so, they're sending a powerful message that they are never going to get on board unless they get more rights as the minority party. Will that work? Hard to say. I don't see Democrats being all that willing to hand subpoena power unilaterally over to the minority party. Democrats don't seem to think that Republicans would be all that responsible with it, would try to call in witnesses who would be more of a distraction than relevant to the issue at hand. But, for Democrats, the strategy here is, it used to be when Nancy Pelosi would get this question, and we asked her this question a lot, she would say, there's no point in pursuing impeachment unless it's bipartisan. Otherwise, it's too divisive. It's going to go nowhere. And she clearly has changed her mind because they took a vote. It wasn't bipartisan. What she said last night and today again is that she believes that the situation is so serious at this point, and the acts that the president committed are so adverse to national security, so out of bounds and abuse of power in her parlance, that she felt that she had no choice, and she would like it to be bipartisanship. She doesn't like the idea of impeachment. She knows it's divisive, but she now says that she felt that the party and the House that she leads had no choice to move forward. So we're definitely hearing a change of position from Nancy Pelosi after many months of feeling exactly the opposite.
Yeah, you know, she really held that line for so long, Nancy. At this point, though, when you look at these testimonies and even some of the past testimonies that could be made public as well, is there anything looking forward that could really be defining, or something that folks on Capitol Hill are really watching for that could change the game on this impeachment inquiry?
Well, I think what's been remarkable so far, based on the opening statements that we've been able to see, the leaks that have come out of these closed-door depositions, is how much unanimity there has been among the witnesses who have testified behind closed doors. They have varying political allegiances. They have varying degrees of engagement with the president or with the leaders of Ukraine. But the basic storyline that has emerged has been quite consistent. There was a pressure campaign on the Ukrainians to get them to investigate the origins of election meddling in 2016 here in the U.S. and Vice President Biden and his son Hunter Biden, who was on the board of a Ukrainian energy company. We've now heard that from multiple witnesses. We've now heard from multiple witnesses that the president was dangling military aid and a potential meeting with him, and possibly even trade negotiations with the Ukrainians. He was withholding all three of those things in order to get the Ukrainians to announce these investigations publicly. We know that he recalled the former ambassador to Ukraine because Rudy Giuliani believed that she was standing in the way of these investigations. So what has been remarkable so far is that all of these stories, by and large, have tracked no matter who's telling them. And so now the question is, who, from all the people that they've heard from behind closed doors, do Democrats put on the stand that they believe can make that case to the American public, can push those poll numbers up? They don't want to bring all of them. They think that that would be completely overwhelming. So they're looking to winnow it down to perhaps just a handful who they think can tell this story in a compelling, cogent way for the American public.
Major, before we go and get your final thoughts as well, looking ahead.
So the president, when this started, and many of his Republican allies said, you know, the whistleblower had no direct knowledge of what happened on that call. Therefore, that whistleblower or any of the accusations brought forth by the whistleblower shouldn't be believed because it's no direct knowledge, third-hand information, hearsay. Well, as Nancy just quite cogently and elaborately laid out, lots of people have now testified who were ever closer to the actual source of not only the July 25th call in question, but everything that led up to it. They did have actual first-hand knowledge of what was being discussed and the things that were being dangled of value to Ukraine in the context of these two different kinds of investigations. And Democrats believe ultimately this is going to be a very provable case that the President of the United States was using something passed by Congress, military aid and other things of value, trade assistance and whatnot, to gain something of particular and personal value, political investigations into 2016 or a future Democratic opponent. Democrats believe that set of facts will be clear once the witnesses and the transcripts have been released. Republicans are holding out hope that that set of facts will not be absolutely persuasive and that Democrats to this point have been over-promising. Hyping is a word you often hear in corridors on Capitol Hill from Republicans. Well, guess what? The public's going to get a chance to decide for itself, and that's going to be an enormously important part, yet unwritten, of this impeachment saga.
I want to thank you both. It's complicated. There's so many characters involved. I'm so grateful that both of you could break it down in a way that we can all understand. Major Garrett and our Nancy Cortez as well. Thank you both for joining us.
Sure.
You're welcome.